find a seat. Just so we've got it on camera, would you go ahead and just tell me your name and where you're from, maybe a little bit about yourself?
I'm Jay Rencher. I was born and raised in Snowflake, Arizona. When I graduated from high school, that was in 1943. At that point, we were in the middle of the war, with the Germans winning significantly up to that point. And then there was no longer young men being called for missions. And they were talking about drafting 18-year-olds. I was 17, and so I got a job in a survey crew, working as a surveyor, until I figured the draft would grab me as soon as I turned 18, and I would then be in the Army. And that's about what happened. I was in the group of the first 18-year-olds drafted in Arizona. And that was just barely after my birthday. And so, because of my surveying experience that I had worked at, they sent me to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, assigned with an engineer MOS number, so that I was assigned to the Army engineers. I didn't mind the Army experience. All my life I had been around guns, was very good with guns. I was a crack shot, and I could hold my own with any German that was over there. And so I didn't mind going in the Army. In fact, at Fort Leonard Wood, when I qualified with the rifle, I had the highest score of anybody on the range that year, and that was in the middle of August, a little more than halfway through the year. And I don't know of anyone beating me by the end of the year. Maybe they did, but it had to be good shots if they did. And so I got through with that, and then they sent me to a special survey school at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, just 20 miles out of Washington, D.C. I was there for a few months learning to be a surveyor in detail. When I got through with that, they sent me my orders. I was headed for England, to an engineer group in England. That's all I knew. When I arrived in England, after crossing the Atlantic in a single ship going across with the German U-boats and all, I expected to be in a huge convoy, and it was a single ship that went across all by itself. The reason was it went fast enough that the U-boats couldn't line up to sink it if it changed course every few minutes. And therefore, the U-boats, unless they just accidentally intercepted it, could not catch the Aquitania or sink it. And so we ended up in England, and when I went to the engineer outfit I was assigned to, they said, "Welcome to the 531st Amphibious Engineer Battalion. We have made the invasion in North Africa, Sicily, southern Italy, and General Eisenhower has picked us to crack the Europe coast. You will be the first man ashore when we invade the continent of Europe." And they said, "The reason you're in this battalion is we expect within the first hour, 75% of this battalion will be casualties. 2 out of 3 will be killed, so we're making the battalion triple strength. Where we have had 1 man doing our job before, now there will be 3 of you, and you will work as a unit. You will do everything together so that when 2 of you are killed, the other one will be there to finish the job and get it done." General Rommel, the German general that was picked out of Africa by Hitler to defend Europe, had made the statement, "I will win or lose the battle of Europe between the low tide line and the high tide line on the coasts of Europe. If I can keep the enemy from getting beyond the high tide mark, I will win the battle of Europe." He was right. Indeed, if he could keep the enemy from getting into Europe with all of their forces, then of course he's won the war. But he knew he had to defend that coast with every ingenious thing they could think of to keep boats and men and equipment from coming ashore. And that had happened throughout the entire coast of Europe. Anywhere it was a possibility of landing, they had made ingenious pieces of equipment to cut ships to pieces, to blow up vehicles, to do everything they could to keep anything from coming to shore. And they said the 531st Engineers' job is to get there 1 hour before the invasion starts, to clean all of that junk off the beach so that ships can land, vehicles can then land, men can then land, and the invasion can succeed. And that was my welcome to the 531st Engineer Battalion. And so for the next 4 months in England, we became demolition experts in a hurry that I had never done in my life, set an explosion bigger than a .30-06 rifle. And so we spent then the next 5 months practicing all the things we would have to do when we arrived on that European coast, using explosives of all kinds. TNT was the most workable tool to blow things to pieces, but if you wanted to cut a steel cable that ran along a lot of the coastline of Europe to keep ships from ever coming ashore, you had to do that with a plastic explosive called Composition C. And it's like a lot of the plastic explosives they use today to implode the buildings and drop them in a heap of rubble in the middle of the building so that it doesn't blow the town away. If you piled enough TNT around that building, it'd level half the town. And so we were very good at blowing things to pieces, which was the easiest way to remove the obstacles that Rommel had put along his coastline. Well, all right. After we had been there, and then with every one of those mock invasions, we would come storming ashore on a coast of England somewhere and practice doing the things that we had to do to get the men and the vehicles onto that beach and off of that beach safely into the area behind the beach. And we were good at it. If we had to cut a big steel spider that was sticking up there to cut the bottom out of a ship if it happened to hit it, you just wrap some of that Composition C around the middle of it, put a blasting cap in and a fuse, light it, and it would just cut that thing in pieces and fall in the sand, and the ship could come in without a bit of trouble. And so we are now on about the 3rd day of June, began to be assembled in the south coast of England. We didn't have any idea which beach we were going to hit, but we knew we were going to hit one. And the Germans did too. They would try to bomb all the places that might be staging areas, and they knew they were assembling men in southern England for an invasion. But the Americans had done a beautiful job of keeping the thing sufficiently secret to the Germans, and they put out a lot of information that made the Germans think it was other places than where they intended to land. The Germans did not anticipate at all us landing where we did. They expected it in other areas. And fortunately for us, the German military commanders were terribly harsh on their subordinates, and therefore the subordinates did not dare make a move that would be wrong. They'd rather not make one than make one that was wrong. They were scared to death of Rommel and the other generals like him, and therefore, until Rommel made the decision, they would not act, and that saved a lot of our lives, because his defenses, his panzer units that were setting all along that coast, they did not put them in operation until Rommel gave the okay. Well, it wasn't a strategic, great military plan, but the invasion happened to coincide with Rommel's wife's birthday. It was intended to be a month earlier, because that's when the tide would be the lowest, when we could most effectively eliminate the obstacles. We knew we had to cut a 2-inch stainless steel cable where we were landing in order for any ship to get on shore. And so our first job was prepared to cut a 2-inch steel cable in water up to your neck. That is not easy, but it can be done, we found out, and learned how and practiced it. We didn't anticipate 5-foot waves contributing to the problem, which made it a little harder when we got to Normandy. Well, all right. That meant then that on the 6th of June, we were now ready for what we had been trained all of this time to do. And I am interfering with your interview because I'm giving you more than you asked for by a long ways.
No way, keep going.
All right, keep going. If you want it to go that way.
I want to hear
We tell you now about the 6th of June, 1944. Okay. First of all, one big difference between the Utah beach that we were assigned to with the 4th Infantry Division, Omaha Beach, was that the amphibious engineers were assigned to the 4th Infantry. A Navy unit, and I don't know who or what they were, was doing the same thing on the Omaha Beach. We demanded we go in 1 hour before anyone else landed. We had gone through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and we knew exactly what had to be done and exactly the conditions under which we could do it. And we couldn't do it with 15,000 men from an infantry unit landing in that area at the same time that I'm trying to blow up obstacles that if anyone is within 25 or 50 yards of me, I'm going to kill him in the process. So I had to be there 1 hour before anybody else was in the area so I could do my work. And therefore, we demanded, and Eisenhower knew that we had to do that, and he completely consented, yes, that's the schedule. And so the 15th Amphibious 531st Amphibious Battalion loaded in their little assault boats and landed 1 hour before H hour that was 6:30 in the morning. We got there at 5:30. It was just barely light enough that we could see our friends and know where they were, but the Germans could not see us very well. If they'd been looking real hard, we were visible. But the Navy was bombarding them with 16 5-inch, 8-inch guns. Every gun the Navy had was shooting at the installations, the fortifications on that beach. And bombers were bombing it at the same time. And so all of the Germans were in bomb shelters that had been built for them behind their installations, and they weren't out with binoculars looking at that beach very hard. Therefore, the first hour of our operation was the least stressful, and we suffered the fewest casualties. We were doing our work, and with all the commotion that was going on, our explosions were minor compared to a 16-inch naval gun blowing up in their face. And therefore, the Germans did not really marshal a force against the 531st Engineers. We were destroying their installations as we wanted to do without great interference to start with. And so we had it by ourselves pretty well. We cut the cable. The little sub-100 would come and drop off 3 men, then they go down 200 yards, drop off 3 more, then they go down another 400 or 500 yards and drop off 3 more. And it was our job to cut that cable and then start working on the obstacles. And as soon as we could clear a path through the beach from the low to high tide, we would put a plastic marker up and then put down a roadway for vehicles to drive on, jeeps and trucks, not tanks. Our roadway was made of sticks, 4 feet long, about that big around, wire weaving them together. So you would roll them out in a big bundle, and the bundle would go about 50 feet, and then you'd tie another attach.
We got further Johnson. Let's go to roll, Grant. Okay.
Continue.
Yeah.
For every one of those obstacles we destroyed, we had a name for them. Like spiders, if it was a big steel triangular gadget to cut the bottom out of a ship. Dragon's tooth, if it was a big concrete pillar that a tank would run up on and make it helpless and sit there till the Germans could blow it out of existence. The butcher knife was a big steel sticking out of a concrete pillar that if a ship hit it coming in, would just cut the bottom out of the ship and the ship would stay there. It wouldn't go anywhere else. Devil's Gate were poles with big mines on them that if any ship got within detonating distance of it by hitting a line or one of the poles or one of the mines, it was blown to bits and it didn't go anywhere. And it was our job to eliminate those, and that first hour, we had them eliminated. We, of course, were eliminating only in the areas where we were assigned, where the ships were supposed to come in. And when we got it safe so ships could come in, we would put up a big fluorescent square marker, one on each end, so the ships could know they had to land between those markers, so they would know where to come. All right, and then we would build a road across the debris and the sand so the vehicles could land on that sand and get on that road and get off the beach without bogging down in the sand. One of the big differences between the Utah beach and the Omaha beach was the amphibious unit with the Omaha demanded that the infantry be there to give them added protection. And when you try to blow up one of those big spiders with composition C that blows steel fragments in every direction for a ways, if there are 10 infantrymen laying under it to get away from the German machine guns that are shooting at them, you can't in any way blow that obstacle off that beach. And therefore, the beaches could not be cleared for the ships to land and for the vehicles to land and for the things to go on that had to go on that beach, unless they could remove those obstacles. And if men are laying under it because someone's shooting at them with a machine gun, you're not going to remove a tenth. And that was exactly the problem. The Omaha beach ended up being a shooting gallery, and the Utah beach was a landing that was amazingly effective and very efficient. And so we did our job, and we did it well. And we didn't have any idea that all the rest weren't having the same success. All right.
Tell me about those machine guns.
Here we go. We were putting the roadway through, and we could see a machine gun that was just a little ways from us in a concrete emplacement that was very well protected, shooting down the beach at people that were starting to come in. Our hour was about over, and the storm was so big, the time schedule got a bit shuffled up. We were landing in seas with waves. The little landing craft were having terrible trouble being loaded, and the whole thing was in a commotion because the weather was very, very difficult to work in and to land in. And so the whole thing was kind of in a chaos. But now the infantry was starting to land and more ships were coming in. The landing craft were beginning to come in large numbers. And we could see the three of us that were there working and realized we weren't three alone. We're a company of men, 200 in about 400 yards of beach, so that you're not alone out there by a jugful. There's a whole bunch of people, but you know what you can do and when you can do it and how you do it, and therefore you stay out of each other's way and get the job done right, or else you end up hurting people. And so we could see that our friends were being shot at a little ways away, but we were down under some dunes, and the Germans were not seeing us. They were looking over us at people a little ways further away. And so I realized we had to stop that machine gun, and I knew we had some reserve packs of TNT that we'd carried to shore with us when we started up under the dune that we'd been working out of. And so I says, keep rolling this stuff out. I've got to go see if I can't shut that machine gun off. And so I grabbed my pack and my friend's reserve pack that was probably about 50 pounds of TNT. Normally 4 one-pound blocks will blow a concrete dragon tooth to smithereens. I must have at least 30 or 40 pounds. I'm not sure how many, but the packs were not easy to carry up there. They were at least a significant weight. I managed to slip around behind the machine gun. They were looking in front of them, not behind them. I put the two packs together on the side of the concrete emplacement, stuck the cap in, lit the match, and ran around the dune about 50 feet away. And every time we set off a significant explosion, we would open our mouth and yell as hard as we could. It equalized the pressure across our eardrums so we didn't blow our ears out of existence. And so I was laying on my belly with my face in the sand about 50 yards from that nest when the whole beach shook. I didn't have to go see if I had wounded Germans or not. I just went back to my guys. The machine gun quit shooting, and we got our road built through. By now, tanks are coming ashore. We had practiced with numerous amphibious tanks that had a canvas canopy around them that would displace enough water that the tanks could float. So they had a propeller on the thing, and we're an amphibious tank that could go through the water, land on the beach, drop their canvas, and they're shooting at the obstacles. So the first tanks to come ashore were the amphibious. We never practiced an amphibious landing in England with 5-foot waves. The freeboard of the tank, where the canvas was only about 2 feet above the level water when it was. And so they put those tanks off of the landing craft about 200 yards or offshore, and I think I only saw 1 or 2, maybe 3, that made it to shore. The waves would come up, fill the tank with water, and it would sink before it ever got to shore, and most of the 4 men in the tank would sink with it. A few got out and managed to come in with the waves, or a salt boat would pick them up and take them back out to the ship. But the amphibious tanks that they'd counted on for the first wave of tanks to come in were flawed in that they would always used in calm, quiet water. You're not supposed to have a storm in the middle of an invasion, and therefore weren't prepared for it. Well, all right, now that the beachhead is pretty well cleared, the thing is now starting in earnest. The Germans are defending it tooth and toenail, and bullets are flying everywhere. The Germans had 4 years of perfecting weaponry, and they had us outgunned 100 ways. They had developed an 88 millimeter rifle that's 3.5 inches, that big. And they used it for anti-aircraft, for tank, for anti-tank guns, for artillery against personnel and light vehicles. Our tanks, by comparison, for example, in Africa, started with 37 millimeter gun, that big, to a 57 millimeter, that big. Those were the ones that we first had when we landed in Normandy. A German 88 would shoot right through our tank like you do a tin can with a 30-06. Soon after that, our tanks we had were 76 millimeter, that big. And only at the end of the war did we get one as good as the German 88. We had to fight the whole war practically, outgunned. Oh, all right. And they were fantastic anti-personnel. Those Germans would shoot at us on that beach. If 3 men were together anywhere, they would shoot at you with 88 millimeter rifles from a mile away up on a hill where we couldn't see them and didn't know where they were. And we hadn't practiced ever in England in those 5 months we were there training, or 4, of picking up a minefield. And we had from 500 yards to a quarter mile of solid minefield behind every beach in Europe. We knew we had to pick up those mines and get a road through them to get the vehicles off of that beach, through the minefield, to a road somewhere inland where then they could disperse and go about their business of winning a war. It was the 531st job. Clean the obstacles off the beach, then get the road through the minefield. So far, the 3 of us had made it without anyone being killed or severely wounded. And we thought we were pretty lucky and were therefore through the worst of it. About this time, we start on the minefield. The Germans up on that hill can see 3 guys standing up down there with a minesweeper and with equipment to pull out those mines, disarm them, pile them off to the side, and mark with a fluorescent ribbon where the path has been cleared so the tanks and the vehicles could follow our road. There are anti-personnel mines in there with booby traps, so when you move them, they jump in the air 3 feet and explode, spraying the area with ball bearings that they're filled with. It's about 30 caliber, so it's like a 30 caliber gun shooting in all directions at you. And some of the tanks are booby trapped, so when you lift it, it explodes. And if you happen to lift it with your hands, it blows you about 20 feet in the air, end over end, 4 or 5 times, hit the ground in pieces, not in one chunk. And therefore, it isn't an easy job to go through that minefield and gather a mine up, and they have them staggered in patterns, so it's absolutely impossible for a vehicle to go through that minefield any way they dodge or any way they drive. They're not going to go 50 yards without hitting at least 1 or more mines. And probably 10 feet will get them into trouble. And so we're starting on the minefield. We get about maybe 50 yards into the thing and are having good luck. Our detector is working very well. We spot the mines. We will find about 4 of them that I can find in one area. I tie a rope onto them. Then I go back about 30 yards, lay down, steel helmet toward the thing, and they pull the mines out. If they explode, they blow us a little sand over us and dirt. And we go back and go another 5 yards and pull them out. And so far, none of them have been booby-trapped, and so we're clipping along at a pretty good rate. The Germans up on the hill see 3 crazy guys down there in that minefield with a detector trying to dismember their minefield. And one artillery shell, you can tell exactly how close they're coming because you hear the whistle of the shell before it gets to you. And the tone, if it's a low pitch, it's quite a ways away. You don't even have to duck. If it's a real high whistle, it's going to hit you right on the head, and you know it. And therefore, you know exactly where that artillery shell is going to land within 10 yards. And so we're up there working away, and one low pitch goes over us about 40 yards beyond us, and we think he's shooting at somebody else. We go about 5 feet further, and this time it isn't a low pitch, it's a very high pitch. And I'm with the detector up in front, and the other 2 guys are about 10 yards behind me, or maybe 20 yards behind me. They pull them out, and they dismember them, and they pile them to the side. And the shell lands just over me, but right between them. And I hear one screaming in agony, and I didn't feel anything hit me, so I thought I was in peace and I could move my hands and move my legs. And I realized that I was still functional. So I crawled back to my friend, and it had lit right beside him, and his legs were so badly hit with shrapnel from the shell that the only thing holding his foot on was the top paratrooper boot laced at the top. It would cut clear through the paratrooper boot at about his ankle, and his other legs were riddled at the same time. And so I knew I had to help him get back to an aid station that they had set up in a depression in the dunes where it was fairly well protected. There was an aid station with some doctors had come in there to help the wounded. And so I started to drag my friend back to the aid station, and he was as big as I was, or a little heavier, and I wasn't succeeding too well at getting him there, so I ran back and shook my buddy that was still laying there, and I says, wake up, this isn't time to be afraid. We got to get a hand back there and get him some help. So I shook him, and when I did, his steel helmet rolled off his head, and I could see the piece of shrapnel had hit him in the temple, and he hadn't even wiggled. And therefore, I went back to my job of getting my friend back. I only went a little ways, and some of the infantry boys that had come ashore saw me having my problems and ran to help me. And we got him back to the aid station. And I didn't know what happened until a few days later. I found out that they had cut his legs off just a ways below the knee. And when, I'm trying to remember if it was below or above the knee, but at least in this area, about where his knee was. And when my friend came out from under the anesthesia and saw what had happened, he lay down and died. He would not live. Dismembered. He was a great baseball fan and baseball player. And when he saw that he had nothing to play baseball on, he gave up the ship. And so my two of the three that were to be killed ended up being the other two. And that is rough because we had spent time training to do everything together. We were like brothers. We knew that our lives depended on each other doing their job exactly the way it had to be done, carefully and precisely. And therefore, I realized instantly that we still had to get that minefield done. And I realized if we stood up once out there, we were going to be killed. Therefore, I glommed on to my two infantry buddies that couldn't get out of there until I got that minefields through. And I said, you've just become amphibious engineers. Come with me. And so we went back to our detector on our belly, crawling like an alligator. We did not, I said, if you get up on your knees, I'll shoot you. Don't you raise up 1 minute, ever. And so we crawled on our belly up there with our nose in the sand. And they were going over us at people beyond us. But the Germans did not see 3 alligators out in their minefield rooting out their mines. And we got to the far side of it that was about 500 yards right in the area where we went through. And we'd marked a ribbon, and I signaled the engineer leaders back there that we had the road through, they could come. And so now the infantry and the jeeps and the trucks and the tanks had a road through that they could go through. And at about the same time, we ended up with 3 or 4 other roads. The rest of the company had succeeded. And the word had got out about then that you don't stand up when you're running that detector or you're going to be killed. And so all of us were doing our job like we had never been trained to, not for 1 second. No one had ever proposed that you can pick up a minefield with your nose in the sand and your head no more than 3 inches above that sand, waving that detector out in front of you until you hear it hum, and then you go carefully move the sand away from the mine, tie a rope onto it, and crawl back a ways and pull it out and hope that it doesn't blow up in your face. Well, by now, the invasion is going full gun, but in the Utah Beach, within 2 hours after we landed there, or 3, there's not a vehicle or personnel stuck on the beach to be shot at. They land, get off that thing, and get out of there within minutes. And therefore, the casualties on the Omaha beach was approximately 10 times what they were on the Utah beach. And part of it was because Rommel had lost his beach defense. and it didn't keep us from getting our people back into the farms and the trees and the villages and the area where now they could farm out. And believe me, the scale of that invasion is impossible to comprehend. They landed 130,000 men, starting about midnight before we got there, dropping paratroopers and glider troopers that were landing in every field in Normandy, close to the Normandy beach, so that they could prevent the Germans from bringing their reinforcements against the beach. But the biggest single thing that stopped it was the German panzer commanders were afraid to move their panzer divisions against us until Rommel gave the order. And Rommel was celebrating a wife's birthday far away from the Normandy beachhead, and the commanders were afraid to make a decision and move without his okay. And therefore, the panzer divisions that might have come up and blown us out of the area never did show up. So that we had our tanks ashore, our artillery ashore, everything that we needed to give a significant defense, at least, were there to do it. And so it went off amazingly well, even though you can't comprehend the slaughter that went on those beachheads. It's something that you just can't believe that happened, but it does. It happens.
Have you had a chance to go back? Have you ever been back?
No, I've never been back. On the 50-year anniversary of the thing, there was quite a movement to go back, but the amphibious engineer group that were together totally disbanded. In fact, within 3 weeks after we were there on the beach, what was left of us, they had nothing for us to do. There was no other amphibious invasions ever to be made in Europe again. And so they just sent the ones that were still alive to a replacement depot, and then they were farmed out into anybody that needed men with that qualification. And so from the Normandy beachhead, I went to a 14th Armored Division that had just come ashore in southern France. And I fought the war out then, the rest of the war, not in an amphibious outfit that I'd been trained to do, but now in an armored division that consisted of 3 combat commands of tanks, a battalion of infantry to support the tanks, and a battalion of armored engineers, they called them, to go and pick up the minefields in front of the tanks, or if we were retreating, lay down the minefields behind the tank to blow the obstacles out of the way if the tanks got stopped by something. And so it was our job to keep the tanks going, the infantry's job to protect the tanks, and the tank's job to blow the Germans out of the way. And so for the next 3 years, we did that with 2 weeks on the line, 1 week patching up our gear and getting it ready to go again, and eating a meal cooked in the back of a truck instead of out of a can or out of a Cracker Jack box. And we then fought our way across southern France in the armored division.
Question for you, before we move beyond D-Day, on a personal level, did prayer play a part in what you're going? Do you have anything to say about that?
A very humorous incident occurred. There was a Polish boy in our group that used to make fun of anyone that prayed, and especially a Mormon that would pray. I never knew another Mormon in the amphibious engineers. I did find one other Mormon in the 14th Armored Division. And so my church connections in the military essentially zero unless I was at Fort Belvoir, Virginia in school, going to the LDS chapel in Washington, D.C. on Sundays with a very nice LDS experience. But once we ended up in that 531st Engineer, the connection with the church came to zero. But nonetheless, there was considerable praying going on, and I had a Polish friend that would make great fun of me if I would say a prayer anywhere he could see me. He would always have some crack or joke or comment to make, trying to belittle me, and it didn't bother me in the slightest. But I noticed when we were in that little assault boat, just before they kicked the three of us out to cut that steel cable, here's my Polish friend back there, praying like fury. I tapped him on the shoulder, and I says, "You're too late. You should have been praying 6 months ago so they would send you to Hawaii in a training group. You said your prayers at least 6 months too late. You're coming ashore with me now, and we'll see how you fare." Incidentally, he lived through it. But I don't think it was because he was praying in that assault boat. I think everybody was doing a little praying in that assault boat, but to me, I was never promised that I would not be killed. I was never promised that I would come back. I felt I was as good a shoulder as anybody else, so I had confidence that I could do my part and could do what I had to do. But I didn't for 1 second think that I had a promise that I was going to live the experience. But after the Normandy invasion was over and I was still alive and in one piece, I said, "Brother Rencher, you're going to make it. The Lord is with you. You won't have to worry now. You're going to make it. The rest of the war won't be too bad." I changed my opinion when we hit the Siegfried Line, and a mortar caught up with the back end of me as I was running south one day. And incidentally, there was some humor to that, because while we were practicing in Europe, in England, we would build baseball teams and had a little league in the division and with some of the other Army units close to where we were stationed. And in the engineer baseball team, their third baseman was the slowest on the team, and that was me. And
We're just getting to the house.
okay. And as I made it to this house and got inside,